3 weeks after Adriano Greco had pressed the straight razor into her palm at La Scala and whispered that war was coming, Sofia Rossi sat in a sunlit cafe off Via Margutta, pretending to care about ivory cardstock and embossed monograms. She had a pencil in one hand, a cup of Darjeeling cooling at her elbow, and a fan of wedding invitation samples spread across the marble table in front of her. Outside, late morning Rome glowed honey gold beneath a pale sky. Scooters buzzed past. Tourists laughed. A florist across the street arranged white roses in galvanized buckets. For one fragile hour, it almost seemed possible that life had narrowed into ordinary things again. Paper, ink, dates, seating charts, a future she could touch. Luca sat opposite her in an immaculate charcoal suit, reviewing security reports on his phone while pretending to be the kind of man whose greatest concern was whether the invitation should say, "Request the honor of your presence," or "Invite you to celebrate." Every few moments his gaze lifted from the screen to her face, softening in that way that still stole her breath. On the sidewalk beyond the cafe window, Enzo Moretti, Luca's lead bodyguard, stood pretending to read a newspaper at the curb, while 2 younger men watched opposite corners. Since the Opera House threat, there was no such thing as an unguarded coffee, an unplanned walk, or a harmless errand. Even this outing had taken 3 cars, route checks, and a last-minute venue sweep. "You hate all of them," Luca said at last, amusement threading through his voice as Sofia frowned at another cream-colored sample. "I do not hate all of them," she said. "I only hate the ones that look like a bank announcing a merger." His mouth curved. "That narrows it down to almost all of them." Sofia drew another invitation aside and looked at him over the rim of her cup. "You laugh now, but one day our children will ask to see these. And if I hand them something that looks like a tax notice, I'll never forgive myself." The word children slipped out lightly, almost accidentally, but it changed the air between them. Luca leaned back, the hard lines of his face easing. "Then we choose the one that doesn't look like a tax notice," he said quietly. "We'll spare future generations the trauma." She smiled. The smile was still on her lips when the cafe window exploded. The sound was not the crack she would later remember, but the impossible violence of glass becoming weather. Luca was moving before she understood what had happened. He lunged across the table, hit her in the chest with the force of a tackling wave, and drove her sideways to the tiled floor. Cups shattered. Someone screamed. A bullet punched through the window frame where her head had been a heartbeat earlier, and buried itself in the mirrored wall behind them. "Down!" Enzo roared from outside. The cafe dissolved into chaos. Chairs scraped, dishes crashed, waiters dove, and people crawled behind the counter. Luca's body covered hers, hard and warm and terrifyingly tense. She could feel his heart hammering against her shoulder. Another shot did not come. Instead, through the rain of settling glass, something dark skidded across the floor and came to rest against the leg of their overturned table. A folded note. White paper, spotted red. Luca swore in Italian, then lifted enough to look toward the broken window. Enzo was already sprinting through the doorway, weapon drawn, one of the younger guards racing after him toward the alley. The street outside erupted with shouts, squealing brakes, and the distant howl of a motorcycle accelerating away. "Are you hit?" Luca demanded. Sofia could barely hear him over the ringing in her ears. "No," she managed. He checked anyway, hands moving over her shoulders, arms, waist. When he found no blood, his gaze dropped to the paper on the floor. He reached for it first, but Sofia was closer. She picked it up with shaking fingers and unfolded it. Inside was a single line written in a neat, almost elegant hand. "I thought the girl who pretended so well deserved a real invitation." A razor symbol had been pressed into the page in blood-red wax. For one suspended second, the room vanished, and she was back in the marble corridor at La Scala, Adriano's cold fingers crushing her wrist, the blade forced into her palm like a promise. Luca took the note from her before her trembling made it tear. His expression changed as he read it. First to stillness, then to a fury so controlled It frightened her more than shouting would have. Enzo returned a minute later, breathing hard, a rage burning in his dark eyes. Motorbike. 2 men. Alley team lost them at Piazza del Popolo. We found a shell casing on the opposite roof. Professional? Luca asked. Enzo's jaw tightened. Very. Around them, the manager babbled about police, ambulances, statements. Luca ignored him. He took Sofia by the hand and drew her to her feet, keeping his body between hers and the blown-out window. Only when they were outside and bundled into the armored sedan did she realize she was still clutching one of the invitation samples. It had a crescent smear of her tea on one corner and a glittering fragment of glass lodged in the paper. The ride back to the villa should have ended there, but in the Vitale world, even terror had to make room for appearance. That evening, they were expected at a memorial concert for Judge Carlo Orsini, a powerful family friend whose funeral had been attended by half the Roman elite and all the people who wanted to be seen beside them. Don Vitale insisted they go. "If we disappear," he said from the rear seat of the convoy. His heavy voice carved from granite. "Every jackal in Italy will smell weakness. We attend, we smile. Then we leave for Sicily before dawn." Juliana argued. Sofia, still raw from the cafe attack, did not. She understood the logic even if she hated it. In Luca's world, visibility was armor as much as exposure. To vanish was to invite wolves. The concert was held in an old palazzo overlooking the Tiber, all candlelight and black silk and low music drifting under painted ceilings. Sofia wore a simple dark green gown Juliana chose because it was elegant without inviting attention. Luca, beside her in black, looked like grief had been tailored into a man. Every face in the room was polished. Every smile hid calculation. Sofia felt more sharply than ever that she stood inside a theater where no one said exactly what they meant. That was what Luca had begun teaching her in the days since La Scala, in quiet murmurs during car rides and over tea on the villa terrace. "Watch the eyes before the mouth," he had said. A liar often checks for belief before he finishes the sentence. Watch the hands next. Men who reach for violence almost always reach for themselves first. They touch the jacket, the belt, the place where the weapon sits. And when they fear the truth, they blink too slowly, as if closing the world out will change it. She repeated those lessons silently now, while Luca exchanged condolences with politicians, bankers, old noblewomen, bishops, men from Naples with funeral faces and blood on their histories. No court had ever proven. The room moved like a tide. Conversations started and broke. Somewhere a violin began to play. And then, at the edge of the receiving line, she saw Adriano Greco. He stood with the easy arrogance of a man who had already calculated every exit. Tall, lean, immaculate in a midnight blue suit. He wore mourning like another expensive accessory. His face was younger than his father's had been, finer cut, almost beautiful, until he smiled. That smile was why Sofia's spine went cold. There was no heat in it, no temper, no visible hatred. Only the sleek, airless satisfaction of a man who enjoyed fear when it arrived clean and quiet. He approached not Luca first, but her. "Signorina Rossi," he said, bowing slightly as though they were old friends at a gallery opening. "I'm relieved to find you alive. Rome can be so unpredictable." Luca turned with lethal calm. His hand settled at the small of Sofia's back, a gesture intimate enough for the room and possessive enough for the man in front of him. "If you have something to say, Greco," he said, "say it to me." Adriano's gaze flicked to Luca, then back to Sofia. "But I do have something to say to her." He lowered his voice just enough to force them closer. "I wanted to congratulate you on the performance. Few women could go from tea-shop anonymity to Mafia Fiancée so quickly. It was inspired, really. Very moving. My father almost believed it." Sofia felt Luca go rigid beside her. Adriano continued, all velvet edges and hidden knives. "What I admire most is the detail. The way you let your hand tremble when his mother introduced you at Bianca's wedding. The way you looked at Luca like a stranger trying to remember where she'd seen the man before. Then, later at La Scala, how naturally you wore the ring. You've improved tremendously. Practice matters. He knew, not just that the engagement had begun as a lie, but how, when. He had eyes at Bianca's wedding. The realization hit Sophia with a cold clarity that made her pulse slow instead of race. Luca had taught her that too. When danger sharpens, stillness is sometimes the only power left. "So that's why you came?" she asked, keeping her voice level. "To tell me I'm convincing?" Adriano's eyes glittered. "No. I came to tell you that lies are expensive. Eventually somebody always pays the bill." He let the words settle. Around them, strings sighed through a requiem and crystal caught the candlelight. A senator in a black tie laughed too loudly 3 steps away, oblivious to the duel occurring within arm's reach. Luca moved half a step forward. "You're here because you can't reach your father, because your captains are breaking ranks, and because you mistake theater for strength." Adriano's smile widened a fraction. "No, Luca. I'm here because your family thinks it understands war, but it still believes war begins with bullets. It doesn't. It begins when people stop believing in the lives they were promised. Ask your fiancée. She had a life before you taught her to duck gunfire." For the first time, Sophia saw the truth of him, without the shadow of his father obscuring it. Adriano didn't merely want revenge. He wanted corrosion. He wanted to infect things, to stain trust, love, memory, future. Bullets were only the loud part. The real attack was always meant for the mind. He bowed again. "My condolences on Judge Orsini, and my congratulations on your engagement. Let's see whether it outlives the season." He turned and walked away before Luca's men could close in without causing a public war in a memorial hall. They left Sicily bound before dawn. The convoy drove south under a moonless sky, cutting through Lazio and down toward the ferry crossing while Rome dissolved behind them into wet highways and sleeping villages. Giuliana and Don Vitale took the first car. Luca rode with Sophia and Enzo in the second. No one slept. Once the city fell away, the road unspooled through long, dark stretches, where truck stops glowed like ships at sea, and the rest of Italy felt hidden behind hills. By the time dawn lifted over the Strait of Messina, Sophia had not stopped thinking about Adriano's words, not because she believed him, but because he had forced her to confront what she had avoided naming even to herself. She did have a life before this, before whispered lies at a wedding, before ambushes, before armored cars and bodyguards and learning how many ways a room could be dangerous. She had work, friends, routines, mornings that belonged only to her. She had not chosen the world of the Vitales. She had stumbled into it with a teacup in her hand and stayed because leaving had become more frightening than staying. The Sicilian villa sat on a bluff above a restless slate-blue sea, surrounded by lemon groves, old stone walls, and enough armed men to hold a fortress. It had once belonged to a baron who liked French gardens and private sins. The Vitales had stripped away the decadence and kept the defensibility. There were terraces overlooking the water, iron gates, underground storage tunnels from another century, and a tiny chapel half buried in bougainvillea. From the outside it looked like paradise. Inside it breathed logistics, fear, and waiting. For the first 3 days, Sophia thought Sicily would break her. Not with violence, with humiliation. Luca did not allow her to drift through the villa as some sheltered ornament while men fought around her. That, in its own way, was harder. Every morning after breakfast, when Don Vitale went into strategy meetings and Giuliana oversaw the household with the brittle calm of a queen in wartime, Luca took Sophia to a walled training court above the sea. Sometimes Enzo came too. On the first morning, Luca placed a wooden practice knife in her hand and told her to attack him. She hesitated. He raised an eyebrow. "If you hesitate because you're kind," he said, "you'll die because someone else isn't." So she attacked. Poorly. He disarmed her in 2 seconds. The knife clattered away. By the 5th attempt, she was breathless, frustrated, and furious enough to stop apologizing when she lunged. Enzo, leaning on the stone wall with a coffee cup and a scar that ran from ear to jaw, called out corrections in his gravelly voice. "Again, Dottoressa. Closer feet. Eyes up. You're asking permission." "Don't." "I'm not asking permission," Sophia snapped after one particularly humiliating fall. Enzo grinned. "Exactly. That's why I said don't." The title, Dottoressa, was a joke from the first week, because Sophia kept analyzing everything as if logic alone could save her. Enzo had served Luca's father for 30 years and had taught Luca himself to shoot, drive, and survive. Under the old hardness, he hid a tenderness almost no one noticed unless they watched carefully. He brought Sophia tea when Luca forgot she hated espresso. He wrapped her bruised wrists after training with surprising gentleness. He told stories about Luca at 19, reckless and impossible, and laughed when Luca threatened to fire him every single time. But Luca was the one who changed her. He trained her body because danger demanded it. But in Sicily, he began training her mind because he understood before she did that minds survive longer than guns. Some afternoons they sat on the terrace with a chessboard between them and used pieces to map families instead of moves. The White Queen was Giuliana when she chose diplomacy. The Black Knight was Adriano because he never came straight at the point. The bishops were priests, judges, senators, men who pretended purity while carrying private loyalties under their robes. Luca would shift a piece and ask, "Who's lying?" Sophia had to explain why. Not with instinct, with observation. "His mouth says yes," Luca told her once, tapping a carved pawn. "His shoulders say no. When those disagree, trust the shoulders. And if the face is perfect, then something else will break. Timing, breathing, the order of a sentence. No one lies with their whole body at once." Week by week, the lessons stopped feeling abstract. She learned to notice which guards checked the western wall because they were diligent, and which checked it because they feared someone coming from there. She learned that men about to betray often became suddenly agreeable. She learned how wealth dressed itself differently in Rome, Naples, Sicily, and in the men who pretended not to have any. She learned to enter a room and count exits before art. Most of all, she learned that courage did not feel the way novels promised. It was not bright. It was not loud. Most days it felt like doing the next unbearable thing while your hands shook. The first proof came on a windy afternoon 12 days after they arrived. The household had settled into wartime rhythm. Trucks arrived with produce and ammunition in the same convoy. The kitchen staff spoke in murmurs. Men rotated watches along the sea path and perimeter wall. Sophia had stopped hearing the click of rifles slung over shoulders because if she heard it every time, she would never breathe normally again. That day she was walking back from the chapel after escaping a suffocating strategy lunch, when she noticed one of the maids, Teresa, in the lemon grove. Teresa was a thin woman in her 40s with soft eyes and a permanent smell of starch. She had worked at the villa for years, Giuliana said. Reliable, quiet, invisible, the way servants were expected to be. Only Teresa was not invisible anymore. At lunch, Luca had intentionally mentioned, within earshot of the staff, that a weapons shipment would leave through the East Gate that night. It was false information, part of a leak test Don Vitale had approved after yet another Greco scout had appeared too close to the property line. Sophia had heard the lie, and watched the room the way Luca had trained her to do. Most of the staff did what ordinary people did around dangerous men and dangerous conversations. They pretended not to listen. Teresa had listened a little too still. No glance, no frown, no visible reaction. But her right hand had gone to her throat and pressed there, just once, as if calming a racing pulse. Now, in the grove, Sophia saw Teresa handing something small to a boy waiting outside the lower wall. A folded paper. Sophia did not call out. She did not rush. She retreated behind a cypress and watched. The boy took the paper, tucked it into his sock, and turned toward the sea path. Teresa went back toward the house carrying her basket of linens as if nothing had happened. The old Sophia might have questioned herself, might have wondered if she had misread it. Cicely had burned some of that softness away. Sophia crossed the grove by the back path, reached the lower wall before the boy, and stepped out with Enzo's spare pistol pointed low, but steady. "Take off the sock," she said. The boy froze. He could not have been older than 16. When he bolted, she fired once into the dirt beside him, not to hit, but to stop. He stumbled, dropped hard, and Enzo came out of nowhere like the embodiment of every old war story, catching the boy by the collar before he could rise. 10 minutes later, the paper lay open on Don Vitale's desk. It was not a full map, only a sketch of the Eastern Service Road and the time of a non-existent shipment. Teresa broke quickly under questioning, weeping that Greco money had paid for her son's surgery in Palermo, that they had threatened to stop the treatment if she refused, and that she had told herself a schedule was not the same as blood. Luca did not praise Sophia in front of everyone. He simply looked at her across the study while Teresa sobbed, and Don Vitale issued orders. In that look was surprise, pride, and something deeper that made her chest ache. Later, when the house quieted, he found her on the sea terrace wrapped in a shawl against the salt wind and placed a cup of tea beside her. "You saw what none of us saw," he said. "I saw what you taught me to see." "No." He stood at the railing, moonlight carving silver along his cheekbones. "You chose to trust yourself. That matters more." She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she stared out at the dark sea and said, "She wasn't evil. She was afraid. That doesn't make the leak less deadly." "I know." Sophia curled her fingers around the warm porcelain. I keep discovering that everything here is two things at once. Loyalty and fear, love and violence, family and prison. It never stays simple." Luca was silent for a long moment. "If it were simple," he said quietly, "I would have sent you away after Bianca's wedding and never let you look back." She turned to him. "Would you really?" His mouth tightened. "I tried. Every instinct I had told me to." He looked at the black horizon rather than her. "Then you saved my father. Then you saved us again. Then you looked at my world and didn't run. I stopped knowing where duty ended and where wanting you began." Sophia's breath caught. In Sicily, their intimacy had deepened in increments. His hand at the small of her back, the way he took her tea the way she liked it without asking. A kiss stolen in a corridor, a night spent talking until dawn with no bodyguard at the door because Enzo had gone deliberately deaf. But that confession landed differently. It was unvarnished. Dangerous because it was true. She set the cup down and stepped closer. "And now?" "Now," Luca said, finally meeting her eyes. "I want you so much it frightens me. And because it frightens me, I keep trying to turn wanting into rules, into protection, into strategy. It doesn't work." The wind lifted a strand of her hair. He tucked it behind her ear with a hand that was rough from guns and gentler than any she had known. When he kissed her, there was no rush in it, only the slow ache of two people who had been skirting the edge of truth for too long. She kissed him back until the sea, the war, the weight of every family secret all blurred into warmth and breath, and the shape of his hand splayed over her spine. Later, alone in her room, Sophia found a letter waiting on her bedside table. It had crossed continents to reach her. The address was written in a hand she had not seen in years. Her father. The paper smelled faintly of dust and old drawers and the life she had left behind in Pakistan. Rahim Yar Khan heat, canal roads, faded prayer mats, a house where silence had become the only language after her mother died. She had not truly reconciled with him before coming to Italy for Bianca's wedding. The distance between them had grown from small old wounds, his pride, her departure, the way he never said love plainly, and she had stopped translating his silences kindly. The letter did not waste time. He told her he had seen photographs of her engagement in an Italian newspaper sent by a business contact. He told her he knew the name Greco before she ever did. Years earlier, after a flood had ruined the family's warehouse and nearly taken everything they owned, he had borrowed money through a shipping intermediary tied to Marcello Greco. The debt was supposed to be temporary. It became a chain. When he could not repay on time, Greco's men asked for favors instead. Shipping records, names, the kind of information respectable people pretended was harmless because it came disguised as paperwork. One favor, he wrote, had been a list of Bianca Vitale's university friends and travel habits after an internship in Florence. He had not known why they wanted it. Only later, after Sofia mentioned Bianca and Italy in passing, had he understood with horror that he had helped place his own daughter's name within Greco reach. "I thought the debt was mine alone," he wrote. "I was wrong. A father's weakness becomes a road others can use to reach the child. I cannot undo what I did. I can only tell you the truth. If you are with these people by choice, then choose with open eyes." Sofia sat on the edge of the bed long after she finished reading, the paper shaking in her hands. She had not been random, not entirely. Maybe Giuliana's desperate whisper at Bianca's wedding had been chance. But Marcello Greco had known her name before that night. He had known where to prod, what to threaten, which ordinary girl on the margins of a Mafia wedding might be easier to use than a woman bred into the game. The realization hollowed her out. Luca found her an hour later when she still had not gone downstairs. One look at her face and he closed the door behind him. She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it once, then again, more slowly, his expression hardening not at her father, but at the machinery that had made such debts possible. When he set the paper down, Sofia said, "I wasn't collateral by accident. I was on their map before your mother ever asked me to lie." Luca knelt in front of her. "That changes nothing about what you are to me. It changes what I am doing here." He took both her hands. "Then tell me." Her laugh came out jagged. "Part of me wants to leave right now, to disappear, to make myself impossible to use. And the rest? The rest wants to burn them all to the ground." Something fierce and sorrowful moved in his face. "That second part is the one I understand too well." Sofia looked at him, really looked at him. Not the controlled heir, not the strategist, not the man everyone in the house obeyed before he finished a sentence. Just Luca, tired, proud, frightened for her in ways he barely let himself admit. "If I stay," she said, "I don't want to stay as cargo, or bait, or the woman everyone hides in another room while men decide what her life means." He bowed his head once in acknowledgement. "Then stay as my equal." By Christmas, Sicily had transformed her more thoroughly than fear ever could. The training continued. Luca taught her to fire not until she loved the gun, but until she hated it less than helplessness. Enzo taught her to drive the narrow cliff roads at reckless speed, laughing when she cursed him in 3 languages. Giuliana, surprisingly, taught her politics over long lunches, who could be bribed, who could be persuaded, who pretended morality while selling access to ports and priests and newspaper columns. In January, the De Lucas arrived. They came not as allies yet, but as a family measuring the price of becoming one. The De Lucas controlled routes through western Sicily and had old grudges with the Grecos, older grudges with the Vitales, and newer grudges with everyone who thought Sicily belonged to outsiders with more money than memory. Their matriarch, Donna Elvira de Luca, was a widow with silver hair and eyes so sharp Sofia felt flayed after one greeting. Her eldest son, Niccolò, spoke little and watched everything. Their daughter, Alessia, smiled as if amusement were the same as trust. The negotiation dinner took place under winter rain in the villa's long dining room. Candles burned low in silver holders. Waiters glided. Don Vitale offered shipping rights, mutual protection, a slice of Rome influence, Donna Elvira offered nothing that did not come wrapped in conditions. Sofia had no official seat at the table, yet Luca wanted her there. "Because they'll underestimate you," he said beforehand. "An underestimation is a door." She spent the first half of dinner silent, listening. The second half was where Luca's lessons and her own instincts fused. The poisoned glass looked no different from the others. If anyone had asked her later what she saw, she could only describe it as wrongness with details. The young waiter pouring Luca's Nero d'Avola was new. His shoes were kitchen shoes, not service shoes. When Niccolo De Luca asked a question about port taxes, the waiter's eyes did not go to the speaker. They went to Luca's hand, then to the wine, and then briefly to the French doors. His left thumb kept rubbing the seam of his cuff, as if remembering something hidden beneath it. "Watch the hands. Watch what fear worships." "Don't drink that," Sofia said. The room stopped. Luca's fingers froze around the stem. The waiter moved first, not toward apology, but toward his jacket. Enzo's pistol was out before the man cleared leather. The shot cracked through crystal and rain. The waiter collapsed against the sideboard, weapon skidding across parquet. Wine bled over the tablecloth. Giuliana didn't scream. Donna Elvira didn't flinch. Don Vitale stood so abruptly his chair toppled backward. Within minutes, the bodyguards had dragged in a second man waiting outside the terrace doors with a silencer and rope. Under questioning, they broke fast enough to prove they had not been chosen for bravery. Greco money. A promise that if Luca died at a De Luca dinner, the two Sicilian families would devour each other instead of Adriano. Donna Elvira studied Sofia over folded hands while the blood was still being wiped from the floor. "You saw him before the men did," she said. Sofia kept her own hands under the table because they were trembling. He was looking at the exit more than the guest. Donna Elvira's expression did not soften. It sharpened into respect. "Then perhaps," she said to Don Vitale, "your son's fiancée is not decorative after all." The alliance was not sealed that night, but it began. So did the truth about the past. 3 evenings later, while rain hammered the windows and Luca met with De Luca envoys in the library, Sofia went looking for shipping ledgers Don Vitale had mentioned in passing. She was not snooping from idle curiosity anymore. After her father's letter, after Teresa's leak, after the poison, she had started to understand that every version of the present was buried in somebody's paper trail. The ledgers were stored in a locked archive room off the old study. Giuliana gave her the key without asking why. That, more than anything, told Sofia Giuliana had stopped thinking of her as a guest. She found what she was looking for by accident, or perhaps by the kind of gravity truth exerts on those already orbiting it. Behind a row of accounting books sat a thin red file marked 2018 Calabria Transfer. Inside was a stack of correspondence between Senator Vittorio Belandi, then a rising political broker with deep connections in Naples, and Vittorio Ricci, Don Vitale's consigliere. Ricci had always unsettled Sofia. Too polished, too agreeable. The kind of man whose smile never touched the muscles beside his eyes. Most of the letters were coded, but one memo was blunt enough to steal her breath. Authorize warehouse sweep. Greco fiancé rumored present. Remove leverage before transfer talks. Beneath that, in Ricci's hand, DV approved. Night operation only. No witnesses. Tucked behind it was a press clipping about a warehouse fire in Reggio Calabria that killed 3 people, among them Elena Veri, 26, art conservator, fiancé of Adriano Greco. Sofia sat back in the narrow chair, the file cold in her lap. Adriano's fiancé had not died in some random feud, as rumor suggested. She had been collateral in an operation Don Vitale approved. Whether knowingly or by manipulation, Sofia could not yet tell. Belandi had wanted leverage removed before negotiations. Ricci had executed the order. Adriano's vendetta had a grave at its center. It did not excuse what he was doing now, but it made his cruelty legible in a new, terrible way. When Luca found her in the archive room, she handed him the file. He read in silence, the blood draining slowly from his face. My father told me Elena died in a Greco storage fire during a police raid, he said at last. Then either he lied, Sophia whispered, or someone lied to him. Luca closed the file with deliberate care. Ricci. He didn't shout. That frightened her more. You think he manipulated the approval? I think Belandi fed him intelligence, Ricci packaged it, and my father signed what he believed was a sanctioned strike. Luca's jaw worked. And Adriano thinks my family murdered the woman he loved because he refused an alliance. Maybe he's not entirely wrong. No. Luca's eyes met hers, tormented and clear at once. He isn't. It would have been easier, perhaps, if that discovery had driven them apart. Instead, it bound them more tightly, because truth, once shared, made pretense impossible. That night, Luca took her to the chapel no one used, and stood with her among dying candle stubs and stone saints, whose noses had worn smooth with time. If this war ends, he said, I will spend the rest of my life undoing what my family has been. If it doesn't end, everything I touch becomes more blood. I don't know yet how to live between those futures. Sophia rested her head against his chest and heard the steady beat that had anchored her through bullets, threats, and every room designed to intimidate. Then don't choose between them tonight, she said. Choose the next right thing. He held her tighter. And what if the next right thing cost me you? Then it was never the right thing. Spring came late, and with it a false sense of breathing room. The De Luca alliance formalized in March. Greco routes were disrupted. 3 of Adriano's captains defected for money. 1 for survival. 1 because Donna Elvira quietly made his mistress vanish until he saw reason. Marcello Greco remained alive, but imprisoned in a place only Don Vitale, Luca, and Enzo knew. Belandi kept appearing on television denouncing crime while feeding it privately. Ricci smiled at the villa table as though no archive file existed to damn him. Bianca, now visibly tired but luminous with new motherhood, returned to the mainland in May with her husband Marco and a 10-day-old daughter named Chiara. Sophia cried when she held the baby for the first time. Maybe because new life felt miraculous after so much death. Maybe because Bianca looked at her not with suspicion or half-truths, but with uncomplicated love and gratitude. If you hadn't been there at my wedding, Bianca whispered while the baby slept between them, I would have lost my father, and maybe my brother too. Sophia kissed the soft curls on Chiara's head. You're supposed to be resting, not making me cry. Bianca laughed, then winced, hand going to her stitches. Then stop looking so noble while holding my child. The kidnapping happened 2 days later. They were on the road back from a private pediatric appointment outside Naples, using a decoy route because Luca no longer trusted public schedules. The attack didn't come from the front, where everyone expected it. It came from an ambulance. Sophia was in the second car with Giuliana when the ambulance drifted across the median and jackknifed sideways, blocking the narrow road. 2 men in paramedic uniforms leapt out shooting. The escort car ahead swerved into the ditch. Tires screamed. Enzo rammed their driver's door before they could aim at Bianca's vehicle. But from the hill above the road, more gunmen opened fire. In the 30 seconds that followed, the convoy shattered into pieces of metal and shouting. Luca's men returned fire. Enzo dragged Sophia down by the headrest and shoved a second pistol into her lap. Giuliana, white-faced and absolutely steady, was on the radio calling fallback positions. Then Marco's scream cut through gunfire. Bianca's car doors flew open on the far side of the smoke. 1 gunman went down. Another reached inside. Marco, bleeding from the shoulder, stumbled after them and took a rifle butt to the temple hard enough to fold him to the asphalt. By the time Luca's flank team cleared the hill, Adriano's people were gone. They took Bianca and the baby. The message arrived 1 hour later through a church sacristan too frightened to speak. 48 hours. Marcello Greco released. Half the Vitale port interests surrendered. Luca and Sofia to be wed publicly in 2 days at the deconsecrated Cathedral of San Michele outside Naples, a ceremony to symbolize Vitale's submission before underworld witnesses. Bianca and Chiara would be present. So would Adriano. If the terms were refused, the child would die first, then the mother. Then one piece of each would be sent back in separate boxes. At the villa, grief became motion. Marco raged and had to be sedated. Giuliana prayed with a rosary that left dents in her fingers. Don Vitale smashed a decanter against the study wall and bellowed for Ricci, Belandi, every captain, every contact. Enzo and Luca turned the map room into a war machine. Routes, church access points, snipers, sewer lines, escape roads. The Cathedral of San Michele sat on a hill with 3 visible approaches and too many blind angles. A perfect slaughterhouse if Adriano wanted one. Which meant, Luca said flatly, that he would expect them to think exactly that. They'll plan a trap, Enzo muttered over the table. Of course we will, Luca said, and Adriano knows it. Yes. Don Vitale's thick finger stabbed the map hard enough to crease the paper. Then we go heavier. He'll go heavier still, Luca replied. He wants us angry, predictable. Sofia stood at the edge of the table, listening to men try to outguess a man whose psychology she now understood better than most of them. Adriano didn't want a clean exchange. He wanted theater. Humiliation. Proof that the fake fiancée who had helped ruin his father would become the instrument of her own family's surrender. Take me, she said. The room turned. Luca looked up so sharply it felt like impact. No. If he wants a ceremony, let him think he's getting exactly what he wants. Bianca and Chiara matter to him as leverage. I don't. I'm expendable to him until I become useful. Let me go ahead of time. Let me trade myself for them or pretend to. Let me see where they're keeping them. How many men? What Adriano thinks he controls. No, Luca said again, and the word came rougher. Sofia stepped closer to the table. You keep telling me not to be cargo. Then stop talking about me like furniture you can lock in another room. This is not the same. It is exactly the same. Only now it's your sister and your niece. Silence roared. Enzo looked away. Don Vitale's expression darkened, but he said nothing. Luca came around the table toward her, every contained thing in him close to breaking. Do you think I don't know what's at stake? Do you think there is any scenario where I let Adriano Greco put his hands on you again by choice? He already has, Sofia said softly. At the cafe. At the memorial. At La Scala. Every time we move, he reaches us before the bullets even land. You need information, Luca. Not just firepower. The thing that changed him was not her argument. It was the truth buried inside it. By midnight, the plan had shifted. Publicly, the Vitales accepted Adriano's terms. Marcello Greco would be moved. The wedding would proceed at San Michele. Privately, Sofia would go first under the pretense of proof-of-life negotiation, accompanied only by one unarmed driver, and watched from a distance by Luca's shadow teams. If she got close enough, she would map whatever Adriano showed her and look for the patterns Luca had taught her to read. She had one hidden transmitter sewn into the hem of her dress, and a coded phrase to use if the situation changed. Luca hated every part of it. That did not make it wrong. Before dawn, while the house slept in shifts and fear, Sofia found herself alone with Enzo in the armory. He was cleaning a pistol with the reverence some men reserved for prayer. He glanced up as she entered and handed her a mug of tea without comment. He always seemed to know when she needed it. You think I'm about to do something stupid, she said. Enzo grunted. In this family, that narrows it down to everyone. She laughed despite herself. The laugh turned into something thinner. Are you afraid? For you? He considered. Yes. He slid the magazine back into place. For the mission, always, fear keeps old men alive, I don't feel brave. Good. Brave people are overrated. Useful people survive longer. Sophia wrapped both hands around the mug. And what am I now? Enzo looked at her for a long moment. In the harsh armory light, the scar across his face seemed older, almost tired. You're not the girl from the tea table anymore, he said. That's either a tragedy or an achievement. Depends what you do next. When Luca came to her room just before sunrise, he found her already dressed. He closed the door and stood with his back against it, like a man bracing his body against a flood. For a moment, he only looked at her, not at the dark blue dress chosen because it concealed the transmitter seam, not at the knife strapped to her thigh, at her face. If you tell me not to go, Sophia said, I'll still go. He nodded once. I know. He crossed the room and took her into his arms with such force it felt less like an embrace than a vow. For several seconds neither of them spoke. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. There's one thing I need from you, he whispered. What? If it goes wrong, truly wrong, you choose yourself before my plan, before my pride, before anything. Sophia touched the bruised shadow beneath his eye, a remnant from the road ambush. I choose us, she said. His mouth trembled into the smallest, most wounded smile. That's what I was afraid you'd say. He kissed her once, briefly, not to make time stop, but to mark it. When he let her go, he pressed a ring into her palm. Not the heirloom sapphire she already wore. A slim platinum band, plain except for a tiny engraving inside. For the life we mean to have. She slid it onto her right hand and almost cried. Adriano kept Bianca and Chiara in an abandoned episcopal residence attached to San Michele's lower cloister. The building had once housed priests. Now it smelled of damp stone, cold iron, and men with too much ammunition. Sophia learned that within the first 6 minutes because Adriano wanted her to learn it. He greeted her in the cloister with the smile of a host, welcoming a guest to a country estate. I'm touched you came, he said. Luca must be either very desperate or very arrogant. Perhaps both, Sophia replied. He led her through the ruined passageway himself, flanked by armed men. She counted without appearing to count. 6 in the outer cloister, 2 at the west door, 1 sniper above the bell tower window, another watching the courtyard from the cracked rose window gallery. Too many visible, which meant more hidden. Bianca was alive, pale, exhausted, furious, but alive. Chiara slept in a travel cradle beside her, startlingly small amid all that stone. Bianca looked at Sophia once, and something like horror crossed her face. No, Bianca said immediately. No, Sophia, whatever he told you. I'm not here to surrender, Sophia said gently, hoping her eyes carried more meaning than her words could. I'm here to make sure you're safe. Adriano leaned against the doorway, listening with amused contempt. Safe is such a flexible word. He allowed Sophia 10 minutes. During those 10 minutes, she mapped the room, the adjoining corridor, the placement of keys on a guard's belt, the windows sealed with iron bars, the fact that Bianca's captors rotated every 20 minutes because one complained about cigarettes and the other smelled of incense. When the baby stirred, Adriano himself stepped forward and adjusted the blanket with unexpectedly careful fingers. That, more than anything, unsettled Sophia. Monsters were easier to hate when they had only one face. When he took her away, he did not bother pretending civility anymore. You know, he said as they climbed the stair toward the nave, Elena loved churches, not because she was devout, because she restored paintings, and churches had more damaged saints than museums had money. She could look at a cracked face and tell you what color it used to be before smoke ruined it. She believed almost everything broken could be repaired if one person cared enough. Sophia said nothing. My father wanted me to marry for power, Adriano went on. I wanted her, That was my great rebellion. Do you know how she died? Not with a gun in her hand. Not in some noble crossfire. She died coughing smoke in a locked warehouse because your future father-in-law approved an operation on a lie. Sophia stopped walking. I know about Calabria. For the first time since she arrived, Adriano looked genuinely surprised. Then perhaps your education is improving, he said softly. Tell me, when you lie with the Vitales tomorrow before God and ghosts, will you be marrying the man you love or the family that burned mine? Those are not the same thing. No? His smile vanished. Then you know even less than I thought. He moved close enough that she could smell rain on his coat. Luca thinks this cathedral will be his trap. He thinks because he has men in Rome, Sicily, and Naples, he understands what I am walking into. Let him believe it. I want him to bring an army. I want him to watch it fail. Sophia felt something cold settle into place inside her. He knows. Good, she thought. So do I. Because while Luca had planned visible defenses and false surrender routes, Sophia had spent the ride to San Michele, doing something Luca did not yet know she had done. The night before, after studying the archive file and the leak patterns, she had placed a call through Alessia De Luca to a family no one expected her to trust. The Santoros of Salerno, smugglers with old business ties to Elena Veri's surviving relatives and fresh reasons to hate Belandi. Adriano believed the Santoros were in his pocket through Belandi's patronage and a promised customs contract. Sophia sent them copies of Belandi's letters, proving he intended to hand their roots to Ricci once the Grecos and Vitales bled each other out. She added one more truth. Elena Veri's death had served Belandi and Ricci as much as Vitale pride. If the Santoros wanted justice, she told them, come to San Michele and choose the side least likely to betray you by sunset. It was madness. It was manipulation. It was the first decision she had made entirely on her own inside this war. The next morning, the cathedral bells began ringing at noon. San Michele stood on a hill of scrub grass and broken statues above Naples, its facade beautiful even in ruin. The front doors had been rehung for the occasion. White flowers lined the aisle in an obscene parody of wedding innocence. Men in dark suits filled the pews pretending to be guests. Above them, saints looked down with chipped noses and patient sorrow. Rain streaked the stained glass. The altar glowed beneath candelabras like something from a fever. Sophia entered on Don Vitale's arm because Adriano demanded the symbolism of it. Music played from a hidden quartet. Luca stood at the altar in black, every inch the unwilling groom, and every inch the man she would have walked toward without witnesses, without traps, without war. His gaze met hers once. In that look she saw everything he could not say. The sniper counts, the roots, and the fear, the love, the plea that she survive him if survival required it. Enzo stood in the front transept with 3 men, outwardly another bodyguard, inwardly a wall Luca trusted more than stone. Ricci hovered near the side chapel, sleek and unreadable. Senator Belandi arrived late, smiling as though he were attending a fundraiser, not the climax of a blood feud he had helped engineer. Adriano took a place halfway down the aisle with Bianca, and the baby held in the line of his men. He did not even pretend to trust the performance. He had come armored, layered, and with far more shooters than the cathedral should have held. Exactly as expected. The priest was no priest at all, but one of Belandi's bribed chaplains, old enough to hate what money made him do. He began the rite in a shaking voice. Names, vows, readings no one heard. Then Adriano laughed. The sound cut through stone like a blade through silk. Enough, he called. Do you really think I crossed half of Italy to watch theater? Weapons cleared jackets all at once. Everything happened too quickly and too slowly. Luca's men rose from the pews. Adriano's shooters appeared in the galleries. Belandi ducked behind a marble column with practiced speed. The false priest dropped flat. Bianca screamed once, clutching Chiara as a gunman yanked her sideways. Luca moved for Sofia. The first shot came from above the bell tower. Enzo saw it before anyone else. Sofia never forgot the sound his body made when the bullet hit. A heavy, ugly impact. He turned toward her, even as blood burst dark across his chest, and slammed into her hard enough to throw her behind the front pew. The bullet that should have taken her skull shattered stone instead. "Enzo!" Luca shouted. Gunfire exploded. The cathedral became thunder and plaster dust. Stained glass burst inward in jeweled rain. Men fired from columns, aisles, balcony rails. Sofia crawled toward Enzo through splintered wood, while Luca and two others returned fire toward the tower. Enzo was down on one knee, one hand pressed over the wound pumping through his shirt, the other still gripping his pistol. "No," Sofia breathed, catching his arm. His eyes found hers. They were still clear. "Up," he rasped. "You're bleeding. Up!" He shoved the pistol toward her with bloody fingers. "Read the room, Dottoressa." Another shot chewed stone above them. Luca was pinned behind the altar rail. Adriano's men were pushing from the north transept. Bianca was trapped near the side chapel, shielding Chiara with her body, while Marco crawled toward her through broken pews. Enzo's hand closed hard around Sofia's wrist. "You wait now, you die," he said. Blood touched his teeth when he smiled. "And then I get to haunt you, which I promise will be unpleasant." Tears blinded her. He pushed the pistol into her hand. Somewhere in the storm of noise, Don Vitale bellowed orders and Ricci vanished behind smoke. Belandi's mercenaries were firing not just at Luca's men, but at Greco's too. That was the final proof. Belandi had intended to wipe the board clean in one massacre and blame the dead. Sofia rose. Not fully. Not dramatically. She came up in a crouch behind the shattered pew, Enzo's pistol heavy and terrible in both hands, and saw Adriano across the aisle shouting at Bianca to move. Saw Luca trying to get a clear shot, and failing because Belandi's men had crossed the center line. Saw Ricci slipping from the side chapel with a gun trained not on Greco, but on Luca's exposed flank. Her heartbeat slowed. Shoulders before mouth. Hands before lies. The moment before violence always belonged to the body. Ricci extended his arm. Sofia fired. The recoil punched through her wrists and all the way into her spine. The shot went wild, slamming marble beside Ricci's head. He whipped toward her, startled. Luca saw the movement, pivoted, and shot Ricci twice through the chest before the consigliere could return fire. Ricci crashed against a baptismal font and slid to the floor, his beautiful suit opening red. For one shattered second, Sofia could not breathe. She had pulled the trigger. Missed, but crossed the threshold. The world did not stop to mark it. Then the cathedral bells rang again. Not because the false wedding continued. Because someone in the tower had seized the ropes and was hauling them with deliberate, savage force. The Santoros. They came through the rear doors and upper gallery at once, firing into Belandi's mercenaries from behind. Men Adriano thought were his reinforcement turned their guns sideways. Alessia De Luca herself appeared in the north cloister entrance like a dark avenging saint, De Luca shooters pouring in behind her. The trap within the trap snapped shut so fast the entire balance of the cathedral shifted. Adriano stared upward, realization cracking through his composure. Sofia met his eyes across smoke and bodies and knew he understood exactly who had done this. The fake fiancé, he had said. Decorative, accidental, improvable. Now she watched his certainty die. Belandi tried to run for the sacristy. Don Vitale intercepted him near the choir stalls. Even through the gunfire, Sofia saw the exchange. Belandi snarling denial, Don Vitale spitting out Ricci's name, Belandi reaching for a hidden pistol. They fired almost together. Belandi went down clutching his throat. Don Vitale staggered backward with a bloom of blood spreading beneath his ribs. "Papa!" Luca's voice cracked across the nave. Marco reached Bianca. Giuliana's flank team swept in from the side apse and dragged mother and child to cover. Luca broke from the altar rail and charged Adriano through falling plaster and candle smoke with the raw violence of a son, a brother, a man whose entire world had narrowed to killing the one person still standing between him and everyone he loved. Adriano met him halfway. They collided at the foot of the sanctuary steps, guns gone, knives flashing. Luca struck first, driving Adriano against the carved balustrade hard enough to split stone. Adriano slashed Luca's shoulder. Luca answered with an elbow to the jaw that snapped Adriano's head back. They moved like men who had wanted this for too long, every blow older than the moment, loaded with fathers, ghosts, lies, Elena Veri burning in Calabria, Bianca taken from the road, tea and blood, and the theater of a wedding turned battlefield. Sofia crawled to Enzo again in the lull between shots. His head had fallen back against the pew. Blood soaked the front of his jacket and pooled beneath him, dark as wine. When she touched his cheek, he opened his eyes once more. "Did you read it?" he whispered. "What?" "The room." She laughed through tears that tasted like dust. "Yes." "Good girl." His hand slackened in hers. For a moment, Sofia let herself break. Just a moment. Enough to feel the old world tear completely away from her. The girl who had once believed tea and kindness and good intentions might be sufficient armor. Enzo had died because he stood where death traveled and chose her instead. There was no path back from that gift, no innocence wide enough to contain it. When she looked up again, Luca had Adriano on his knees. The knife was gone from Adriano's hand. Blood ran from Luca's shoulder down his sleeve. Around them, the gunfire had thinned into isolated shots and groans. Belandi was dying. Ricci was dead. Santoro and De Luca men were securing the doors. Don Vitale had collapsed against a pillar, Giuliana kneeling beside him. Bianca clutched Chiara and sobbed into Marco's neck. The entire cathedral smelled of smoke, wet stone, and the opened seam between two lives. Luca reached into his jacket and took out the straight razor Adriano had once forced into Sofia's palm. He unfolded it slowly. Adriano looked up, breathing hard, blood at the corner of his mouth. "Do it," he said. "Become what you are." Luca's face changed, not softer, clearer. "No," he said. And with the razor blade, he drew one sharp line across his own palm. Blood welled instantly, bright and shocking. "This ends with me," Luca said, voice low and carrying. "Not with another grave you can worship. Not with another woman burned for men's pride. Not with another child inheriting our dead." He let the blood fall onto the broken stone between them. "Your father will answer. Belandi will answer. The dead do not return because we make more of them." For one impossible second, Sofia thought it might work. Not redemption, never that, but surrender, a fracture in the machinery of vengeance. Then Adriano's eyes shifted past Luca, past him, toward Sofia. He moved with the speed of a man who had never intended to live beyond this moment. One hand flashed inside his torn coat and came out with a compact pistol taped flat against his ribs. He twisted, aimed not at Luca, but at Sofia, and smiled with all the ruin of himself in it. The shot he meant never happened. Sofia fired first. The bullet struck Adriano high in the chest and drove him backward off his knees. The gun flew from his hand and clattered across the sanctuary. For an instant he looked astonished, not by pain, but by the fact that she had done it. That she, of all people, had become the line he could not cross. Then he fell onto the blood-marked stone and did not rise again. The silence afterward was worse than the noise. Sofia stood with the pistol lowered and smoke curling from the barrel. Her ears rang. Somewhere far away someone was shouting her name, but the cathedral seemed suddenly underwater, all motion slow and distorted. She looked at Adriano's body, at the red spreading beneath him, at Luca, who turned toward her with horror and understanding and love breaking across his face all at once. She had pulled the trigger. This time she had not missed. Luca crossed the space between them in 3 strides and caught the gun as it slipped from her numb fingers. Then he caught her, arms locking around her so tightly she could barely breathe. She pressed her face into his neck and felt the violent tremor running through him. "You saved me," he whispered. The words should have comforted her. Instead, they tore something open. "I killed him. You saved me," Luca said again, and now his voice broke. "Sophia, look at me." She did. "There are deaths that damn a soul," he said. Blood from his cut palm marked the side of her face where he touched her. "And there are deaths that stop murder from continuing. Do not let Belandi and Ricci and every rotten thing that led us here tell you those are the same." Across the sanctuary, Giuliana cried out. Don Vitale was dying. They carried him from the pillar to the front steps because he insisted on seeing the sky. Rain had stopped. The clouds above Naples were tearing open into a strange pale light. Giuliana knelt beside him holding one hand. Luca took the other. Sophia stood close enough to hear every ragged breath. The Don no longer resembled the immovable force who had commanded rooms with a glance. Pain had stripped him down to age, and regret, and love too late admitted. Blood soaked through the linen compress over his wound. A priest, this time a real one, dragged in from the lower village, waited respectfully back while the family said what mattered first. Don Vitale looked at Bianca and the baby, at Giuliana, at Luca, finally at Sophia. "I built walls," he murmured, each word costing him. "Thought walls made a family safe." His gaze fixed on Luca. "But walls become tombs if the men inside them never change." "Don't," Luca said hoarsely. "Save your strength." His father gave a shadow of the old disdainful snort. "For once, listen instead of command." Blood touched his lips. "Belandi lied, Ricci lied, but I signed. I let men convince me power was cleaner than mercy." His fingers tightened weakly around Luca's. "Do not inherit that from me." Luca bowed his head over their joined hands. Sophia had never seen him look like that. Young enough to be only a son, despite everything. "Lead differently," Don Vitale whispered, "or burn with the rest of us." His eyes shifted to Sophia one last time. "You were Chance," he said, voice thinning. "Best thing that ever happened to my son." Then the breath went out of him and did not return. The next 6 months passed in the strange, brutal rhythm of aftermath. Funerals first. Enzo in Rome with honors no newspaper fully explained, and a line of hard men weeping as if each thought no one could see. Don Vitale in Tuscany under private guard, bishops and politicians and criminals kneeling in the same church while Giuliana wore black like a second skin. Marcello Greco was transferred into state custody through channels Luca forced open with Belandi's letters. Belandi himself died in hospital under arrest before trial, but not before enough documents were seized to crack 6 patronage networks. Ricci's death ended a quieter empire of blackmail that prosecutors would be years untangling. The Santoros received their promised routes and something rarer: public acknowledgement that Sofia Rossi, not any capo regime, had saved their family from Belandi's betrayal. Adriano was buried without ceremony. Luca became head of the Vitale family because there was no one else. But the crown did not settle on him the way power had settled on his father. It sat like weight, like obligation, like a question. He spent the first months cutting away pieces of the empire with the focus of a surgeon and the sorrow of a man amputating his own inheritance. Gambling fronts were sold. Protection rackets dissolved. Shipping companies were laundered into legitimate export businesses under De Luca oversight. Men who wanted only blood left for other banners. Men who wanted salaries stayed. Sophia stayed too. Not unchanged. Never unchanged. For weeks after San Michele, she could not hear cathedral bells without tasting stone dust. At night, she woke reaching for a gun she hated. Sometimes she stared at her own hands and remembered the recoil as if it still lived in bone. Luca refused to let her carry the burden alone. At Giuliana's insistence, and because grief was devouring them in different ways, he agreed to meet regularly with Father Matteo, an old priest on the Tuscan estate who had heard more confessions from killers than Rome would ever record. And later, when Sofia asked for more than absolution disguised as conversation, Luca found a trauma therapist in Florence discreet enough to keep their secrets and honest enough not to romanticize them. Healing was not beautiful. It was repetition. Some evenings that meant tea instead of wine, because sleep mattered more than numbness. Some mornings it meant walking the vineyard roads at dawn when nightmares made beds unbearable. Other days it meant talking about Enzo until his memory stopped being only the sound of a bullet hitting flesh and became again the man who mocked Luca's posture and brought Sofia contraband pastries from Palermo. And sometimes it meant letting Bianca rage and cry and clutch Chiara too tightly and admit she sometimes hated everyone who had survived because almost losing her daughter had made love feel like punishment. Giuliana grieved with elegance until elegance broke. One afternoon, Sofia found her in the old greenhouse with soil under her nails, planting white camellias because Don Vitale had once said they were too fragile for their climate. He was wrong about so many things, Giuliana said without looking up. I have decided to enjoy proving it. In late autumn, Luca took Sofia to Pakistan. Rahim Yar Khan was heat, dust, late pomegranate light, and a version of Sofia that still lived in door frames and family photographs even after she had outgrown it. Her father opened the gate himself. He looked smaller than she remembered, older in ways distance had hidden. But when he saw her, he covered his mouth with one hand, like a man struck by both joy and guilt at once. What passed between father and daughter that first night was not miracle reconciliation. It was halting, awkward, honest. He asked no questions about San Michele, because by then the papers had printed enough to make imagination cruel. Instead, he cooked tea the way her mother used to and listened while Sofia told him exactly how fear had traveled from his debt into her life. He did not defend himself. When she was done, he said only, I should have chosen humiliation over danger. I chose wrongly. Luca asked for her hand the next morning in the courtyard under a neem tree. The formality of it would have amused Sofia, if it had not undone her. Luca, who faced armed men without a tremor, stood before her father with both palms visible and more visible nerves than she had ever seen in him. He spoke plainly. He said he loved her. He said he had failed to keep her from harm, and would spend the rest of his life trying to deserve the fact that she stayed. He said he could offer neither perfect safety nor an easy name, only honesty, and a future he was rebuilding with his own hands. Sofia's father looked at him for a long time before answering. My daughter was not born for fear, he said. If she has chosen you after everything, then I would be a fool to imagine my permission is what makes it real. His voice roughened. But you have it. The wedding took place 1 year after the cafe window shattered. Not in Naples, not in Sicily. In Tuscany, at the vineyard the Vitales had once treated as a leisure property, and Luca had turned into the first symbol of what the family might become if it survived itself. The ceremony was held outdoors beneath white roses and olive branches. The guest list was careful, smaller than the world expected and truer because of it. Donna Elvira de Luca came in midnight silk and kissed Sofia on both cheeks, as though inducting her into some private order of women who had seen too much and refused to break. Alessia Santoro arrived laughing, scandalous and alive, carrying a gift no one admitted was a bribe. Marco cried more openly than Bianca. Chiara, now a fat-cheeked toddler, tried to eat the flower petals. Giuliana wore pale silver instead of mourning black. There was sadness in her still, but it no longer erased the rest of her face. Before the ceremony, she pressed something cool into Sofia's hand. The straight razor, melted down and reforged by a Florentine goldsmith into 2 thin threads hidden inside the wedding bands. "Let vengeance hold your vows together," Juliana said. "It may as well be useful for once." Sophia laughed, then cried, then did both at once. When she walked toward Luca through the vineyard light, there were no gunmen in the galleries, no false priest, no bargain made with killers. Only wind in the cypress trees, sunlight on polished wood chairs, and the man who had once been a stranger holding tea at a wedding where everything began wrong. His suit was simple, his eyes were not. She saw the whole road between them in one impossible rush. Bianca's reception, the lie, the opera threat, Sicily, Enzo's grin, Belandi's rot, San Michele, blood on stone, Pakistan dust, mornings rebuilt cup by cup. Their vows were brief because neither trusted elaborate promises more than ordinary ones. Luca promised truth even when it humiliated him. Sophia promised not to let him turn love into self-punishment. He promised that any power left in his hands would be used to open doors, not lock them. She promised to remind him when grief tried to masquerade as duty. When they exchanged rings, she felt the faint, imperceptible seam where old metal had been melted and remade. The reception spilled across the vineyard in warm dusk and strings and the clink of glasses. There was dancing. There was more food than any sane wedding needed. There were speeches half tender and half threatening, because even reformed Mafia families did not fully abandon form. Bianca told the story of how Sophia had once arrived at her wedding looking like she wanted nothing more than quiet tea, and now somehow outranked half the men in the room in strategic intelligence. Alessia tried to steal the microphone and was restrained by Donna Elvira with maternal precision. Even Marco got his revenge by describing Luca's expression the first time Sophia ignored his orders and drove into a firefight. Late in the evening, when the sky had turned indigo and the first lanterns glowed among the vines, Sophia slipped away from the crowd with a familiar instinct for the edges of celebration. She found Luca sitting alone at a small table near the terrace wall, a porcelain cup of tea between his hands. The sight hit her with such tannic sweetness of harvest waiting in the dark. Luca slid the teacup toward her. "Still too hot," he warned. She smiled and wrapped her hands around it anyway. Some things shouldn't change. He watched her over the rim of his own cup. In the softer light, the lines grief had carved into him over the year had not disappeared. They had simply become part of the map of his face. She suspected the same was true of her. Healing had not returned them to innocence. It had taught them how to live without it. "Do you ever think about that first night?" he asked. "At Bianca's wedding? At the table. Before my mother asked you to lie. Before either of us knew what we were stepping into." Sophia leaned back and listened to the distant music. "Sometimes. Usually when life is quiet enough to feel unreal. And if you could go back?" She looked at him. "Would you want me to say no?" His smile was slow and a little sad. "No. I'd want you to be wiser than you were." "I am wiser now," she said. "That's why I still would have said yes." Something moved across his expression then. Love deep enough to frighten lesser people. Gratitude with old pain still folded inside it. Astonishment that fate had given him not peace exactly, but this. He reached across the table and laced his fingers through hers. Below them, the celebration went on. Above them, the first stars appeared. Between them sat a cup of tea, warm in her palms. No longer the emblem of a naive life interrupted, but a thread connecting every version of herself. The woman she had been, the one she had feared becoming, and the one she had chosen. Months later, when harvest ended and winter pressed silver frost along the vineyard rows, Sophia stood in the doorway of the nursery that used to be a guest room and watched Luca trying to assemble a crib with the severity of a man defusing a bomb. He looked up at her in mock offense when she laughed. "I have dismantled criminal syndicates," he said. "This should not be harder than that. And yet here we are." She rested a hand over the small curve of her belly and let the sight settle into her bones. The future still frightened her sometimes. It should. She knew too well how fragile joy could be. But fear no longer owned the whole horizon. Outside the window, vineyard workers were laughing near the storage barn. In the next room, Juliana was dictating menu revisions for Christmas. On the desk downstairs lay contracts for a new export partnership that had nothing to do with extortion, smuggling, or blood. The world beyond their land was not fixed, not pure, not suddenly safe. Yet inside the life they were building, violence was no longer the first language spoken. Luca finally snapped the crib rail into place and looked absurdly pleased with himself. Sophia crossed the room, took his face in both hands, and kissed him. "For the record," she said against his mouth, "your first performance as a fiancé's fake bodyguard was far less convincing." He laughed, caught her by the waist, and kissed her again, deeper. "For the record," he murmured, "I was never pretending as well as I thought." She believed him. Because love, she had learned, was not the opposite of danger. It was what remained when danger had stripped everything oriental away. It was the hand that covered you when the window exploded, the voice that taught you to read a room, the grief that stayed without turning cruel, the future rebuilt piece by piece from ruin. It was not innocence restored. It was innocence transformed into something sturdier. And somewhere, perhaps, the dead were at rest at last, not because revenge had honored them, but because the living had finally refused to become its servants. Long before anyone had whispered that impossible plea at a wedding table, Sophia Rossi had thought a quiet life would be enough. She had not been wrong. She had only failed to imagine that quiet could be earned after thunder, that tea could taste sweeter after smoke, or that a heart dragged into darkness might still learn, stubbornly, how to make a home in the light.